The first shot came from the ridge before anyone had turned to look at it. Emma was in one of the last wagons, wedged between two crates and a cedar trunk, and she pulled herself deeper into the space between them without deciding to. The canvas above her went bright with the low sun, and then dark again as something moved past it, fast. Shouting. Horses. A second shot and a third close behind. And then the groan of a wagon brake released in a hurry, and the whole train came apart into separate sounds, each one pulling away from the others. The trunk smelled of cedar and something older underneath it. She pressed both palms flat against the wood. Boots hit the ground outside, close. Not the rhythm she had learned over 11 days on the road. The canvas at the back of the wagon pulled open. He was already looking at her, a man she had placed at the edge of camp the last 3 nights. Quiet, eating apart, gone still in a way that was not the same as idle. She had watched him turn toward sound twice before she heard it herself. He had 2 horses on a short line behind him. He put the reins of the nearer one in her hand without a word. She took them. They rode hard into the broken ground south of the road, where rock pushed up through red dirt, and the tracks they left were harder to read. He chose the terrain without speaking, and she followed his line without questioning it, the 2 horses moving together through the failing light, the sounds of the wagon train pulling away around them until there were no sounds at all. When the last of the light left the sky, he slowed to a walk. The desert smelled of heat leaving the ground, dry and mineral, and something underneath. She listened behind them and heard nothing following. He kept them walking another hour before he stopped beside a rock outcropping and got down, and she got down after him. He saw to both horses. She stood on solid ground, and her legs remembered what that was. He set out what he had: a canteen, dried meat, a wool blanket. He held the blanket out without looking up from checking the cinch on her horse. She took it and sat with her back against the rock. He settled 6 feet away, hat pulled low, eyes on the direction they had come from. The desert made its nighttime sounds around them, something small in the scrub, the tick of cooling stone. After a long while he turned his head. "You hurt anywhere?" She thought about it honestly. Nothing that won't keep. He turned back to the dark. She pulled the blanket tighter, and after a while she slept, which surprised her. He was awake when she opened her eyes before first light. He had not, she understood, slept at all. The canteen was within her reach. She handed it to him first, and he took it, and drank, and handed it back, and they packed what little there was without speaking and were moving before the sky went from black to gray. The sun came up and meant it. By mid-morning the heat was a thing with weight. He angled them toward whatever shade the terrain offered without being asked and without remarking on it: a shelf of rock, the shadow side of a dry washbank, a brief corridor between 2 boulders, small adjustments that cost him nothing and that she noticed and did not mention. She had a sewing kit in her coat pocket. Needle and thread, a folded piece of flannel, 2 buttons. She turned it in her fingers while they rode and then put it away. He had been watching the terrain ahead. He said without turning, "My name's Cale." She looked at the side of his face, the jaw, the way he held the reins loose in one hand like a man who had done this a long time. "I'm Emma," she said. He nodded once. They rode on. By the second afternoon the sky had changed in the west. She saw the light go yellow-green at the edges, the clouds building fast from nothing into something that had made a decision. She had seen this before. She knew what it meant. She drew her horse up alongside his, and he was already reading the ridge to the east, already turning toward the dark line along its base. An overhang, something deeper. He pushed to a canter, and she matched him, and the wind came up hard against them both, carrying the first cold smell of rain. The rain did not wait. It came down all at once, not the beginning of rain, but the full weight of it, immediate and total, the kind that turns the world to sound and gray, and nothing else. She bent low over her horse's neck and rode. The ground beneath them went from dust to running red mud in the space of 100 yards, and the thunder moved through the rock around them more than through the air, felt in the chest before it was heard. She could not see the ridge clearly. She could see Cale ahead of her, and she kept her eyes on him and rode. Her coat was soaked through inside a minute. The cold of it reached her skin and stayed there. The horses ran with their ears flat, and their breath coming hard, and the rain drove against them sideways off the rock face, and found every gap in collar and cuff and boot. Then the sound changed, the rain hitting stone above them instead of open sky, and they were inside. The cave was sandstone, dry, smelling of minerals, and old dark. The horses calmed once they were inside and away from the full roar of it, though the rain still sheeted past the entrance in a gray wall, the desert floor running with water in channels they could hear but not see. Cale got down and took both sets of reins, and she got down after him. He saw to the horses first. She wrung out the hem of her coat with both hands and looked at what it produced, and did not say anything about it. He built a fire from dry debris packed into a back corner over years, the kind of fuel that takes a careful hand but burns steady once it catches. When the flame held, he fed it slowly, and it grew, and the light reached the walls and the ceiling, and pushed the dark back. Emma crouched close and held her hands out. The heat reached her palms and then her wrists, and she turned toward it the way the horses had turned away from the rain, without deciding to, simply because the body knows what it needs. Cale set his hat on a dry rock and crouched on the other side of the fire, and steam rose off his shoulders in the heat. He produced a second portion of dried meat she had not known he had, and set it between them on the rock floor. She ate half, left the other half. He ate it later. The rain did not let up. She took the sewing kit out again, not for any purpose. She opened it and looked at what was in it. The needle, the thread, the flannel, the 2 buttons, and Cale glanced over once from his place near the fire. His eyes went to her hands, then back to the rain. She closed the kit. After a while he moved to the cave mouth and crouched there, watching the water sheet off the rock lip outside, the desert floor running dark and fast below it. The fire threw his shadow long against the wall behind her. She woke later to the fire burned to embers, and the rain gone quiet, and his coat folded beneath her head. He was at the cave mouth still, or again. She lay still and watched the last of the ember light move on the ceiling, and listened to the silence where the rain had been. She sat up. He didn't turn. She said, "You should rest." He kept his eyes on the gray beginning to show at the cave mouth. "Won't be long now." She lay back down. He was right. It wasn't long. The desert after rain had a smell like the ground had been holding its breath for months. The rock walls of the ridge still dripped when they rode out. Both horses picked their way through the wet carefully, without being directed. They were an hour south when she heard it. Horses, more than 2, moving through the terrain they had just left. Cale turned them into a dry wash without a word, both horses stepping down into the cut of it quietly, stopping in the deep shadow of the bank. He put a hand on her horse's nose alongside his own, and both animals stilled. Then his voice came low beside her. "Slavers. They don't leave witnesses." She did not move. The riders came into view above the lip of the wash, 3 of them, working slowly through the broken ground, reading tracks. She recognized a pinto among them from the ambush, their voices carried down in fragments. A word, a short laugh. She watched Cale's shoulders. They did not change. Her own heart, loud in her ears when the riders first appeared, found the same stillness and slowed itself there, beat by beat. The riders passed and did not turn. After a long time he looked back at her. Just that, one look, and she put her hand on his arm before she had decided to. A moment only. Then she took it back, and they climbed out of the wash and rode south without either of them saying anything about it. The town showed itself slowly. A water tower, then a roof line, then a thread of chimney smoke rising straight in the still air. Emma looked at it from a long way out and felt something shift in her chest that had no clean word for it. She was still looking when she felt it. A change in Cale's horse beside her, barely a thing, one eased breath. And she understood it had come from him before she saw any change in him at all. What she saw, when she looked, was almost nothing, just the faint release of something he had been holding since Tuesday. She turned back to the smoke rising straight above the roofline and did not say anything about it. They rode in on the main road. The town was small and sun-bleached and had the look of a place that had decided to stay. A general store, a livery, a church with unpainted wood gone silver. People on the street who looked up and then looked at other things. A woman came out of the dry goods store and stopped on the steps. Emma was down off her horse before anything else could happen. She walked toward her sister, and her sister came the rest of the way, and they stood together on the packed dirt street and held on. Her sister's husband shook Cale's hand on the porch that evening with the particular economy of a man who has already made up his mind and sees no reason to perform the process. He asked one question about the road south. Cale answered it in a sentence. That was the whole of it. The kitchen smelled of wood smoke and something that had been on the back of the stove since morning. Emma sat at the table and felt the days behind her settle. Not gone, just put down, the way you put down something heavy when you finally find the right place for it. Her sister fed them both and watched them the way she had always watched things without appearing to. Cale cleared the table without being asked. He went out after to help with the evening feeding and came back in while Emma and her sister were still at the table. He took off his hat and looked briefly at the hooks by the door and put his beside her sister's husband's because there was no other place for it, and sat back down. He did not say anything about the road or the next job or where he had been going before Tuesday. The woman at the general store the next morning looked at Emma's left hand and let her mouth arrange itself toward something. Emma set her coins on the counter. Her mother's name was the only thing she said, just the name, plain like a door closing, and she took her thread and walked out. Cale was at the rail with his horse. He looked at her face when she came out. She stopped beside him. The morning was cool, and a line of washing down the side alley moved in the small wind, the fabric heavy and stiff, sun-dried and smelling of it. He said, "Trouble." She looked at the washing. "Handled?" He was quiet. Then the corner of his mouth moved, brief and certain, and he turned to check the near stirrup, though it did not need checking. She stood beside him in the sun and did not move to leave, and neither did he. She had the sewing kit in her pocket. She had carried it for 11 days on the road and 3 days across open desert, and she still had it. She did not take it out. but she felt the shape of it there. That evening she sat at the kitchen table with the kit open in front of her. Not working, just open. The lamp lit the table gold, and the house had gone quiet around her. Cale came in from outside. He stopped when he saw her. He crossed the room and sat down across from her and put both hands flat on the table and looked at what was in the kit. She picked up one of the buttons and set it between them. He looked at it for a long time. His hands did not move. Then he looked at her. "You'd be needing somebody who's staying." She met his eyes across the lamp. "I would." Neither of them moved. The lamp burned between them, and the house was quiet, and outside the horses shifted in the pen and settled again.